And we are live. Hi, I'm Whitnie Wiley. That's Robert Hilliard. And we are here for the State of Leadership, where we are talking about all things leadership, namely things that we are finding interesting in the news, having a discussion about them, and seeing how they can help you be a better leader, lead your team better, and get better results. And so this week, we're going to be talking about something that I'm finding really interesting, because when we first started having a conversation about talking about this, the articles were sort of leaning one way. And then, of course, you do your homework, right? You do your research and you find out that there are things happening on both sides of this. So we're going to be talking about hiring standards and some of what's happening in terms of companies having trouble filling vacant positions. There are some 7.4 million unemployed people. There are, depending on who you listen to, this particular information comes from an article in the Wall Street Journal that there are 10 million job vacancies, right? So that means there are more jobs than there are people to fill them. And it's happening in all different sectors, different levels of experience in different industries. But the way it's being handled is being handled very differently depending on where you are, right? And some 55% of job seekers, according to ZipRecruiter, want to continue working remote, or at least partially remote. And so we've talked about this in past weeks, this sort of values mismatch. There's a skills mismatch. There is a mismatch about what employers are looking for and what employees are looking for. And ultimately, the conversation I'd like to have, after I get some feedback from you on what you've been reading in regards to this, is, what are some things, some considerations, some strategies that companies can use to try to solve their hiring challenges. And of course, we're not going to prescribe that you should do X, Y, Z, but here's some things to consider as you're going about doing what you're doing. And before Robert launches in, I just want to say, you're watching. If you're watching live, we welcome your comments. Please join in the conversation, leave a comment, and we will bring it up and discuss it here during the program. And if you're watching it on replay, let us know and leave a comment, and we will interact with you in the comments. So Robert, what say you?
Well, I don't know if I'm saying it, but I know that a lot of organizations, what they're doing to kind of entice people to come to them is to, I don't want to say lower their standards, but they're lowering some of their requirements, some of their hiring requirements. And what they're doing is they are, for a lot of organizations, they may say you need to have X amount of college. They're removing that. Some organizations are saying no college at all, can open up that pool. And what they started seeing is that when they did that, they got I don't want to say a lot, but they got a lot more people interested in working with them. But that created some other issues. So as they were doing,
you can
only imagine, right? So that created some other issues. So when you have a lot of people that are looking to work remotely, that does limit some organizations to, okay, well, they want to take some people more locally, right? And so they opened themselves up, and more local people came in. They changed some of their requirements, and they found that they weren't getting, I don't want to say the quality, but they weren't getting, the quality they expected. And so they had to go back and look at how they wanted to do things again. So now some of these organizations are saying, okay, we can keep those requirements down, but then we need to do more, better screening. So
Right.
maybe more training, better screening to make sure they're getting the type of candidate that will fit their organization.
Well, isn't it, hiring is not it's not like a linear prospect, right? When I was working in the last job that I was in, the the person who was responsible for the recruiting tended to advertise the jobs in a particular or a couple of particular publications, right? So if you have your mindset a one track thought process on how you're going to go about doing your hiring, your recruiting, then you'll probably continue to get the same sorts of candidates. And so this thought that, well, we'll lower some of the requirements or standards or however you want to look at it, rather than looking at and I'm always a fan of this, looking at the problem, if you want to call it a problem, challenge, in a holistic manner, right? And go back to Whitney's favorite thing is what's your vision for this workforce? What is your vision for the people that you're hiring and the job that you want them to do? Which means actually going back to the job description and the job announcement. But let's not go there right away.
Okay.
So you're reading, they drop their standards, they drop their requirements, they get an increase of candidate, but which was a problem they were having, right? Was just quantity. But then you increase your quantity, but it does not necessarily increase the quality of the candidates or the applicants that are coming to you.
Right, and there's two things. I want to point out the reason why we're not using the term, where we're trying to avoid using the term standards, because that really, when you say that you've lowered your standards, that has a very negative connotation to it. Because there are some people out there, and I know folks that are who don't have college per se, but are brilliant people, and
right, of course,
and could go into a job and just crush it. So that's why we're saying low requirements, because it's the requirements that organization has for that particular organization. But when you start looking at what the organization wants, it's really important that you look at go beyond these requirements and look at who do you want to work for you, what skills do those people have, what are they bringing to the table? And I think that's more important and a lot of times than all these other things. Now, you and I are big proponents of education, but that doesn't mean that someone who is less educated is not just as capable.
Right.
And I think that's really important. So what they saw is a lot of what they were doing is having those requirements at that level. They were actually screening out a whole group of people that are who don't have those requirements, who could possibly do that job, but they just, then it took this particular crisis for them to say, you know what, maybe we should lower that requirement and bring these folks in, but without putting the safety valve in and say what other requirements do we need to make sure we're getting the candidates that are going to be best suited for our organization. And I think that's the critical step. And like a lot of people, we tend to forget, people that work in HR and those recruiters, they're very busy. And organizations on a whole, they have people doing a lot of things. So what tends to happen is they put a process in place that they think will run as automatically as it can. And then they realize that they have to go back and do some checks to make sure that the process they put in place is actually working for them. And they forget that critical step.
So I'm going to say I actually did use the word standards because it was, and I don't want to say clickbait, but maybe controversial. is a way to get some people.
Okay.
What are they talking about over there? So,
What are my standards?
so I did actually use that word, but you're right. We're not talking about lowering your standards, as in, just take anybody off the street, but your requirements. And we're going to get to a conversation that I touched on, and what you just said, I think touches on for me at least, the crux of the matter and the things that I try to get my clients to focus on when we are talking about hiring and the recruitment processes in general. But again, going back and looking at it holistically. So, um, what struck me in this is again, we've got employers saying there's a labor shortage, right? And workers are saying there are jobs out there. I'm applying for jobs. They won't let me in. I'm qualified for these jobs, but they won't let me in. And you touched on something that's really important that was very much discussed in some of the articles that I read, and I will put links to them, links to articles in Bloomberg, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, and I'll post those links for the things that I read. But this notion that it is okay to automate your process to such a degree that you are screening out so many people that could potentially be really good employees for you. They could be good in the job. They may have done the job. And there were comments made by recruiters and others in these articles that are, and I don't want to say that they have blamed the employees and the applicants for this, but they don't recognize that the process is automated, and it's about keywords, and it's about matching your application, your resume, and your cover letter to the job announcement in such a way that the automation process doesn't just rule you out
Right.
from the very beginning. And it's not the fault of the worker or employees or applicants not to recognize that that's happening. But at the same time, I'm a big believer that your job, your career, your job search, all of that is your responsibility. And so taking the time to find out what's happening in 2021, right? And we're about to be in 2022. What's happening in hiring and recruiting processes that I need to be aware of that will allow me, the best chance of moving forward, and recognizing the role of your resume if you're sending one in, right? If it's not a technical application, you're sending in your resume. What is the role of the resume? And then what is the role of the job interview, and understanding the hiring process for each and every company that you're applying to, because they're not all the same.
Right.
And so what you did for one company is not necessarily going to work for another. And if you've got robots or bots or whatever they are, these screening algorithms that are reviewing these hundreds of documents, right, that come in, and you're talking, when you change the requirement, it changes the candidate pool. Right. So now you've got more, which means you really do want to automate this, right? If you go from, say, 100 applications to now you're getting multiple hundreds or 1,000 because the requirements have changed, and now more people theoretically would be qualified for the job, you don't want to necessarily have to review by hand the multiples of those increased applications.
Right. Yeah, and also there's a lot that goes into this. We sit here and we're looking at it from a very bird's eye kind of thing. And I've done recruiting, and I know you get tons of stuff coming in, and you look at it, and you're like, oh my goodness. So you have knockout factors, right?
Yes.
And so you have these knockout factors, and okay, you take this whole pile over here. So these are, and then before you know it, you're down to, a small portion of the resumes that came in. Maybe it's more manageable for you. But then when you really get into that, maybe you call some of these folks in, and shocker, just because somebody has something on their resume doesn't mean they've actually done it. Or because people sometimes inflate that. Not all people, but some people do. And then you have the interview, and then and I've done a lot of that, and I've trained people on how to interview. And I remember a lot of times we get these folks that come in for these interviews, and it was clear that what they had on their resume was not them.
Right.
Right. So that brings you back to, okay, now I have nobody for this position. I'm still looking for this position. I have this whole pile of people that I knocked out because of whatever factors I have. Maybe it's time to look at those knockout factors again. And that's something that I think that some of these organizations were actually doing. They were using college and other things as a knockout factor. And for all kinds of different reasons. I read articles that said that, when you do that, you limit your diversity and inclusion in organizations because certain groups of people may not be as educated as other groups of people for a whole lot of systemic reasons. So they're looking at this, and then they remove that requirement, but they didn't do the other part of it, or they realized they needed to do it later on. And you need to take a real holistic approach. And sometimes it's better to deconstruct your recruiting approach, and then put it back together in a way that's going to work for the organization and for the people that are coming in to possibly be employees in your organization.
So I want to follow up on that and then start talking about sort of this holistic thing, which is, deconstructing and putting it back. And I think there needs to also be a flexibility, right? That all recruitments are not created equal. And so to have a particular approach that you are like doggedly stuck to for each and every recruitment is something to consider. I'm not saying don't do it, but it's something to consider. And if hiring managers, if HR staff personnel are having difficulty bringing in people, I'm with you. Maybe it's time to go back to the drawing board. We're trying to apply, I think, in a job market that is not really like one we've seen. It's not like one I've seen in, in the decades that I have been.
That was a good save.
I was going to throw out a number there, but let's just say decades. In the decades.
Could be one, could be two.
It's unlike any, right? Either, generally it's been an employer's market, so to speak, and they pretty much get to decide, who, what, when, where, why, if, right? And this one, while it is very much an employee's market, it isn't totally.
No.
And that has been the interesting thing about what I've been reading is that that's where there's sort of this tension where both sides are sort of waiting each other out on who's going to give in first, right? So we've got this, employers, I'll put it this way, employers need workers and workers need work, right? Mm-hmm. And it really is a dance. My belief has always been, before I was in this line of work, when I was sort of just an employee, was that it's a symbiotic relationship, right? Both sides get something out of this. And it is best when you can come to a place where both sides get what they need. I get at the same time that you particularly if you've got a company of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, right? You cannot manage that on an individual basis, right? It just is it you can't scale something like that to hundreds of thousands of employees. So I get that. At the same time, you are the person that's applying. This is just me, and I need you to treat me like a human being in this process, not just a number, not just a scanned resume, right? Not just some random document. And so finding the right balance for that is a challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. So um, what is happening is pay, benefits, schedules, employee development. These are some of the things that are on the table. Employers are, in general, looking to get the most they can get from employees for the least amount of money. I'm talking in general, right? Employees are looking to do the work that they want to do, that they're qualified to do, but do as little of it with the most flexibility for the highest pay that they can get. And they're sort of, I'm not going to do the right, this place, this range where it all comes together. And taking the time to figure that out on both sides is is the holy grail in this process. So if I'm an employer and I'm waiting for employees to stop asking for the moon because for the last year plus, they've sort of gotten to do it in a different way. And now they don't want to go back to the old way. But that's where my mindset and thinking is. It's making it difficult for me as an employer, as a hiring manager, as an HR department, maybe to be a little more creative in my thinking, right? And at the same time, you've got employees who are looking for work saying, I see all these jobs out there. I'm qualified for jobs, but I'm not being able to get past the threshold, that past the gatekeeper, the algorithm or whatever to get in the door. There's a responsibility on them as well to figure out how to make that work. So I say all that to say, going back to the point about being holistic, deconstructing this process, that instead of trying to do something like on the fly, oh, well, we'll just drop this requirement, or we'll throw more money at the problem, which is something some companies are doing.
Sure.
And I was reading some things about particularly Wall Street, not just throwing money, but lots of money, right? To the tune of, one of the articles said, these 8-figure packages of things. Now, these are not entry level employees
Right.
we're talking
Yeah.
about here, right? We're talking about people on the upper scale, but they're creating a revolving door, right? That people who are saying, well, I'll go after the money, will go after the money and realize I'm not trying to live the life that money used to be the answer to, right? So that was the old way. Now it's about flexibility.
For many people, it is.
Right? It's about other things than just the money. So if the company's solution is to throw money at the problem, and money isn't what people are looking for anymore, then you've got to start to rethink your approach. And that's the essence of the message that I want to leave today for companies, for leadership, for hiring managers, HR personnel, wherever you are on the corporate side, to rethink this in a holistic way, not just, not make assumptions about what you think the problem and the solution is, but to take the time to actually find out, right? To ask questions, to talk to not only your employees, maybe some of the employees that have left. We talked a few weeks ago about exit interviews. If you can, get some information from people who have left, and even from applicants that are trying to get in, and whether you're letting them in or not, and try to understand what's going on with the labor force, so that you can find where that place is, that happy medium, so that you can get the talent into your organization that you need, and make sure that you are providing for them what they need, so that once they get in, that you can get a return on your investment from recruiting and hiring them.
Well, yeah, and a couple of things came to mind when you were talking. One is, and I hate to say it because we seem to say it in every single episode, but values. You got to look at the values, right? It's something that comes up, and some people may think it's touchy-feely, but people are going to, those are the principles that you operate on, your values.
Yes.
And they're looking for employment that's going to allow them to operate on those principles. And it becomes an issue when there's a mismatch. The other thing that came up is there's plenty of research out there. Organizations should do this. Trade papers, there's white papers, there's all these things. There's the newspaper, there's peer-reviewed articles. There's a lot of research that's going on right now. Absolutely, this stuff. And look at that stuff and then find out. Look at your area. What's going on? What do people want in my area? What do people want globally? And we talked about the fact that many organizations are, allowing people to work remotely. This is very helpful for them. They can recruit more people. Maybe it's time to look at that as well. Maybe some of the jobs will allow you to do that. So there's a whole host of things. But I know from the other side, when, from working, as a recruiter, as part of my job and working in HR, you have edicts coming from higher up, fill this slot. And then you have the people above the person in HR going, how come this slot is still empty? And then that's when you have all these problems. And so you need to really get buy-in from the people that are above, who have, they have their own woes that they're dealing with. They're trying to run a business. And then you have people that are running HR that are trying to make those folks happy. And then you have the recruiter that's got these knockout, so it's systemic, and it just runs through the entire organization. And I think that we usually see, when one department has a problem, it's up to that department to fix it. But a lot of times that department can't fix it until they have buy-in from other places in the organization. And that's one of the things that I've seen. I've been involved in that. How come this position is still empty? Well, we have all these knockout factors, and then the people that we did get, and this is for folks that are out there. Maybe some advice for people that are looking for jobs. Make sure the stuff on your resume is stuff that's actually you. Don't exaggerate. And people do that because a really good recruiter is going to ask those questions to find out whether or not you actually did the stuff on your resume. And I worked on both ends of that. I worked as a recruiter sometimes, and I was the trainer of all the hiring people. So I would say, you don't want to ask questions about, okay, well, how would you handle this? They'll tell you anything. You ask questions. Okay, you said you did this. How did you handle that? Walk me through that process. And you can see, okay, whether or not they can walk you through that process from start to finish. It's a pretty good indicator that they've actually done it. Tell me about yourself is it's not a great interview question. It may be a good icebreaker, but when the whole interview is just, talking about what that person could possibly do in the future, and and a lot of back and forth rapport building, which is a part of it, but that should not be the entire interview. You don't get a real full picture of what that person can do. And I think that was a big eye opener for a lot of the people that were hiring in one of the organizations that I work with. They were just like, okay, I like that person. That person seems like a nice, individual. Their resume looks good. They have great education. Let's get them in the organization. And then they come into the organization. They're just not a good fit for the organization. Maybe some of the things that were on their resume were a bit exaggerated. Maybe it wasn't a good culture fit. Maybe the values match wasn't great. And before you know it, companies are spending sometimes twice that person's salary to replace that person. Right. And that was a case that, I had to make to a couple of people in the organization so that we can look at the hiring process and recruiting process and kind of retool it so that it was more streamlined and less, it was just kind of catch as catch can. It's like, oh, I like this person, and what are your requirements? Oh, this person had great college, and what were your requirements? This person, they told me that they could handle any problem. And then when those folks got in, because there wasn't any, from our perspective, any standards, they were just getting anybody. So we had to look at that and change that. And that's a process that you need to do on a regular basis. And I think that, a lot of organizations got caught off guard because they hadn't looked at it until they started realizing a problem because of the pandemic.
So, you mentioned something when you talked about values. I don't know that you meant to sort of highlight this, but the values mismatch isn't always company to employee or applicant, right? Mm-hmm. What you talked about were these mismatches within the company itself, where different departments or different individuals within the organization are prioritizing different things, and it makes for difficulty in filling those positions, those vacancies. One of the things that I work with my clients on is having a hiring plan. You cannot necessarily, when you get an unexpected vacancy, you cannot necessarily, use the hiring plan as envisioned, but it gives you a roadmap, right? And if you are tying things to the organization's strategic plan, there's a hiring plan, you've got, understanding of what it actually takes to get the work done in your organization, what qualifications, what skill sets, what personality types are good, right? There are certain personality types that do well in certain kinds of jobs. It just is, right? And so understanding what that is, or if you have people who have different personalities, then may be ideal for a particular job, that you understand how to work with them to bring out the best in them, right? So there are other things that can be done besides, say, throwing out a college diploma as a screening tool, right? There are assessments. There are validated assessments that can be used that will help you understand who is best for a particular job, or with accommodations and particular resources, tools, and strategy help, coaching, mentoring, and the like, that you can take others and help them through the process. So there are all kinds of ways to do this. And I understand, the need to do it as cost efficiently and effectively as possible. But if you look at the bigger picture, again, going holistic, the investment can give you a much bigger return than you think you might get by the capital outlay on the front end. So I just want to say that this is about opening your mind and being creative on how you can approach this differently. I just think right now we're in a place where trying to superimpose the old ways of thinking about work on what's going on is not necessarily helping. And I'm just suggesting open your mind and be open to some alternative approaches, some that you haven't thought of, some may not have even been created yet. I don't know. Maybe you get to be the one to create something. We've got some dynamics going on that require a different approach. So, and with that, I've always believed, again, even before stepping into this line of work, that going back to understanding what it takes to be successful in any particular role, that you go back and you can deconstruct those job descriptions, right? The job requirements. You deconstruct those and then reconstruct them about what it actually takes to be successful in those jobs, and be willing to offload things between employees who are part of a team or a group to make sure that things get done in the best way possible. So I hire for potential, but the only way you can really hire for potential is to know what potential you need, right? Which is why a hiring plan and understanding job ladders and where people go, and in your interview process and in the early days of onboarding, understanding where people may want to go in their career with your organization, so that you can develop them in a way that makes sense for what you have going on.
Yeah, that's something that you and I talked about a long time ago, hiring for potential. And you want to hire someone who could actually learn, on the job what's going on. And you need to be able to ask those questions in your interview. Look at your interview questions and see how they're constructed, so that you can get the right candidate in, and can answer those questions about what skills and talents they need to fill the spots that you have open. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think where I want to, I'll give you your last word, whatever it is.
Me? Oh.
Yes. Your last word, not the last word.
Oh, okay.
Any final thoughts you want to share?
No, I think it goes both ways. For those folks that are looking for jobs, do your research as well. It's not just about the employer, it's the employee. Do your research, update your resume, make sure that it, don't exaggerate, make sure you have your most relevant things on there, things that you can actually do, and come to your interview with really good questions. They like that, really good questions. And for those folks that are hiring, find out really what you need, like Whitney was saying. Find out what you really need in those, deconstruct that, look at the holistic approach, try to get people other than those folks on your team involved. Get some buy-in from higher up if you really need to take that apart, and look at what you really need for your organization to be successful, and not just fill a spot in your organization. I think that is so important.
I agree. I want to say, on the employee side, the applicant side, candidate side, recognize that just as this landscape that we're in is different for employers, and really having to pay attention and consider what it is that employees want. You've got to do the same about how companies are going about doing their recruiting processes, right? It is less and less done that applications and resumes are screened by humans. Some 90% is a statistic that I've read. 90% of companies use some sort of automated screening, at least for the initial screening. So if that's the case, there are algorithms and they're looking for keywords. You need to make sure that you have those, so that you can get in the door. The job of the resume is simply to get you an interview, right? And so if you don't have a resume that will do that, then you're going to have problems getting in the door. And then, as Robert said, make sure while you're putting forth a resume that gets you in the door, make sure it's an honest resume so that you can stand behind it. It doesn't do you any good to get in the door and then, you know, fail in the interview because they find out nothing in your resume is above board, you know, in the first 5 minutes. So you've got to do your part. You've got to do the research about the companies, understand the hiring process, all of that. And then on the employer side, the company side, be open to looking at how you are doing your recruiting is really the message that I want to leave you with. Is just to be open to doing it a new way, or just a modified way. And yes, that's going to take some time, but I think you'll find in the long run, it will serve you. You can, if you've got things that you got to do right now, just do them and then look at a longer term, over a long term horizon on how you can make some modifications that can make it work for you a little better. And as much as everyone wants to make more money isn't always the only solution to the problem. So, with that, we want to thank you for joining us again for the state of leadership. If you've got a topic that you would like for us to explore, leave a comment for us or send one to either or both of us in the messenger portion of LinkedIn. We enjoy having these conversations, and we thank you for not only watching but participating. And if there's anything we can do to help you with your leadership development, employee development, please reach out. We would like to be able to help you in those endeavors. So with that, thank you again for joining us for this week, and we'll see you next week, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific on Thursday. So take care.